Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. Right off the bat, readers know not to trust the account presented to them in Brandon Hobson's novel, The Devil is a Southpaw. The confusion over who the subject of the narrative is and who's telling it is part of the story and what is ultimately a message of hope in light of loss. And Vanessa Lillie's mystery, The Bone Thief, also incorporates people's perceptions of the past, including the true story of a massacre in New England and what many of us know about the first Thanksgiving. We'll hear from both of these best-selling authors right after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Brian Bull, sitting in for Antonia Gonzalez. An important report on the missing and murdered Indigenous persons crisis has been removed from the Department of Justice website. Many MMIP awareness advocates and officials have questioned its absence, according to Newsweek. U.S. Democratic Senator Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada says the Not One More report disappeared in February. She was with the Senate committee that introduced the 2020 Not Invisible Act, which mandated the report. Cortez Casto and Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska reached out to the Trump administration to have the report reposted, but Newsweek says they were told the White House took it down to comply with the president's executive order that determined there were only two sexes. Cortez Masto is quoted in Newsweek's coverage as saying she firmly believes this isn't about gender, DEI, or wokeness, but about keeping tribal communities safe and providing tribal leaders and law enforcement with the tools they need. A Native Hawaiian organization is tasked with taking care of Native Hawaiians across Hawaii and the continental U.S. when it comes to the health and well-being of Native Hawaiian people. Keopo Relitz, Director of Policy and Strategy at Papa'ololakahi, says the organization was created by an act of Congress in the 1980s to address the Native Hawaiian healthcare system. Relitz was among the more than 2,500 attendees at the National Congress of American Indians annual convention taking place in Seattle this week.
At home, it means making sure that we're supporting our Native Hawaiian healthcare systems. It also means that we're supporting community-based organizations that are helping to make sure our people are thriving and able to live and thrive in Hawaii. And that also means that they're doing so if they are one of the diaspora Hawaiians. So if they were either born outside of the United States or had to move, we also support community-based organizations that are making sure that they're connected to their identity, connected to resources that they need. Because as we know, as Native people, if we don't have our culture, if we don't have our language, if we don't have that identity, then the core of our well-being is impacted.
Relitz says it's important to be at events like NCAI in order to listen and learn from other Native people. She says it's good to be partners, allies, and advocates, pointing to the partnership which helped create the Native Hawaiian Healthcare Improvement Act, done in collaboration with tribes. Health and wellness are among the many issues discussed at the NCAI gathering, which wraps up on Friday. And it's not every day you get to see an eagle, let alone two together, alive and up close. As KJZZ's Gabriel Pietrorazio reports, it's something visitors of a Phoenix nonprofit recently did while blessing these animals during an annual Native American wildlife celebration earlier this month.
Robert Mesto with Liberty Wildlife is Pasquayaki and honors eagles Cisco and Anasazi with a song.
And they're revered for their strength, their intelligence, and even their healing and protective powers.
Things the Phoenix nonprofit is helping guests tap into. 1 November Sunday morning.
Pinch some sacred tobacco, take it to the eagle, and say their prayer. And oftentimes the eagles will flap their wings. To feel the wind of the eagle is like the ultimate experience.
That lasted for an hour. Augie Molina, who is Pasquayaki, spiritually prepared people bringing offerings to the birds by burning sage bundles and tapping them with a fan made from feathers, while those being cleansed bathed in the smoke.
When you smudge, it's going to take as long as it's going to take.
For National Native News, I'm Gabriel Pietrorazio.
This is National Native News. I'm Brian Bull.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support for law and justice-related programming provided by Hobbs, Strauss, Dean & Walker, LLP, a national law firm dedicated to promoting and defending tribal rights for over 40 years. More information available at hobbsstrauss.com. Support from Clarkson Potter, publisher of Turtle Island, Foods and Traditions of the Indigenous Peoples of North America by Native American chef Sean Sherman. With ancestral and modern recipes, this cookbook showcases diverse foodways of the continent's regions.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. In Vanessa Lillie's new novel, The Bone Thief, Cherokee archaeologist Sid Walker takes on a series of disappearances from the Narragansett tribe in Rhode Island. The mystery sheds light on a powerful historical society's plans to cash in on indigenous artifacts. It's a fast-paced, page-turning sequel to Lillie's acclaimed thriller Blood Sisters, and is already on a lot of prominent must-read book lists. And The Devil is a Southpaw is a new novel by Cherokee author Brandon Hobson. It's a story within a story that dives into narrator Milton Muleburn's obsession with the life and artistic talents of a boyhood friend in a small Oklahoma town. It's an emotional character study that packs a lot between the lines, including Hobson's own artwork. Both authors join us today for this month's Native Bookshelf. Listeners, you can join us too with your comments and questions by calling 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Joining us now on Zoom from Providence, Rhode Island is Vanessa Lillie. She is an author and a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. Hello, Vanessa, and welcome to Native America Calling.
I'm so happy to be here, Sean. Thank you for having me.
I'm happy to have you as well, Vanessa. And joining us from Las Cruces, New Mexico is Brandon Hobson. He is an author of the new novel, The Devil is a Southpaw, and he is also an associate professor at New Mexico State University, and he is also a citizen of Cherokee Nation. Brandon, hello, and welcome to Native America Calling to you as well.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's great to have two Cherokee Nation citizens on the show today. And Vanessa, I'm going to begin with you, and let's talk more about Sid Walker, the main character that you have created for both The Bone Thief and Blood Sisters. As we mentioned, she's a Cherokee archaeologist. And between these two stories, what's interesting here is that the setting moves from Oklahoma, where you are originally from, to New England, where you live now. So what can you tell us about the writing process that brings this character Sid to Narragansett country in a way that kind of mirrors your own travels?
That's right. They say write what you know, Sean. So I wanted to start out and write about my hometown where I grew up in northeastern Oklahoma first, in Blood Sisters. And certainly about my Cherokee family, my Cherokee heritage. In fact, my character, Sid Walker, Walker is the last name of my family member who was on the Trail of Tears, whose allotment land we still have in the family. And, you know, who the graveyard still stands where we're buried. So kind of sharing that with readers really, meant a lot to me creatively and personally, because so much of what we do as Indigenous writers and creators is fight erasure. So moving the story then to Rhode Island, which is where I've lived since 2011, and moving here, being Cherokee from Oklahoma, that's really different than Narragansett from Rhode Island. The Narragansett here have been here time immemorial, and I learned a lot about the tribe and have been so lucky to connect with them. And so I wanted to hopefully do justice to their incredible story of resiliency, because they were here when the first boats came over. And just as the Cherokee have the Trail of Tears, the Narragansett have the Great Swamp Massacre. And so that opens the story for my archaeologist main character. And I'm able to share real Narragansett history in The Bone Thief, just as I did real Cherokee history in Blood Sisters.
Now, as in Blood Sisters, you refer to certain actual historical events in The Bone Thief, like you mentioned some of these already. And then you also reference King Philip's War. And that's known by a couple of other names, including the Great Narragansett War and the War for New England. How did you find out about this major conflict between New England tribes and the British, and is it more well known elsewhere?
It's interesting. On my book tour, I am, especially in Rhode Island, I've been asking people to raise their hands if they've heard of the Great Swamp Massacre. And I'm lucky if half the room has. And that's not meant to be an indictment. It's more just that a lot of this history isn't taught. And the place I started in my research was Our Beloved Kin by the Indigenous historian Lisa Brooks, which is both a pre-colonial and colonial history of New England. And there's just so many interesting pieces that I continue to kind of think about how can I put these in a thriller because that's always the challenge, right? And I was, the diplomacy of the, Narragansett, the Wampanoag, those tribes that, first had to deal with the colonists coming over and deal with the king, and then among themselves. I mean, it was truly a diplomatic effort, and I really wasn't aware of that until I started the research. And the matriarchy and the female sachems or chiefs, sachem is kind of out here what they call a chief. The female sachem and that leadership was something else I tried to capture, including, real places that you can actually visit that are connected to the female leaders here. In fact, in King Philip's War, or if you want to indigenize it, the War for New England, the last sachem who was killed was a female sachem, Quapen. So finding examples like that was really exciting to me because I love sharing history, even within the context of a contemporary thriller. And I think, readers look to my books to learn about Indigenous history as well as being a page turner. So that's my job.
Okay. Now, you also wrote an essay for WBUR in Boston, and you talked about how events like this and even the Tulsa race massacre there in Oklahoma, which occurred near where you grew up, you didn't know a whole lot about some of these events. So it seems like you feel a responsibility now to give light to these parts of history that don't often make it into classrooms.
I really do. I mean, that was the Tulsa Race Massacre when I learned I was in my 30s when I learned about it. I was embarrassed really that I wasn't aware of it. And, you can sort of say, well, I wasn't taught it in school, but in some level, I think I wasn't necessarily seeking it out either. And so when I did learn about it, it really made a mark on me to be much more proactive about all history because so much of it is hidden, because so much of it is painful, so much of it is rooted in supporting colonialism. And when we know truth, it's harder to support those colonial ideals. And so you're right that the Indigenous piece is so important, not only my own, Cherokee story and that history, but in the land I live on now. And I have found that people want to know, I mean, yes, it's hard to hear, that land has been stolen, even contemporary examples of the government, hurting Indigenous people. But I think people do want to know. And I also would say that it's so hard to heal if we aren't, having some reconciliation about it. And so even though I write thrillers, I do think there's at least a conversation in there that can help with that.
All right. Let's go back now to talk about Sid Walker. Here she is, a Cherokee person living in Rhode Island, a little out of her cultural element, as you've explained. What connections to Native culture translate for Sid and what doesn't?
Well, I loved sharing the Narragansett powwow within the early part of the book because that's something I experienced very early on moving here. And the powwow here in Rhode Island is the oldest continuing powwow recorded in the country. 350 years this powwow has been happening in the same place. And that was so powerful to me, coming from a people who were removed from their land, to think of that, the dances and the medicine and to have that continue generation after generation. So sharing that piece and seeing how they celebrate powwow and was really powerful to me. Also, returning to their history, so much of it felt like an echo. What happened in the Great Swamp Massacre, thinking about the impact on their tribe, and then, considering that in the context of the Trail of Tears, looking at the kind of economic challenges that the tribe has had, and thinking about some of the own economic challenges that the Cherokee have had. And, different paths diverged. The Narragansett here tried to get a casino, actually, and that was fought viciously by the government. And, the Cherokee did get casinos, and we've, benefited a lot from that. And so just the kind of economic narrative, which is really important in the context of a colonized people and an oppressed people, to kind of explore those pieces as well.
And you do that in the book also because you touch briefly on casino issues, but one of the other subplots in the book is that this tribe also has a tobacco store, a tobacco business, and there's it gets shut down basically. I mean, that all factors into the story.
Absolutely. So the smoke shop raid, it was a real event that happened in Rhode Island, and the tribe on their own sovereign land were going to sell tax-free cigarettes. And again, this is in the context of they tried to get a casino, they hadn't gotten that. This was sort of another step to try to kind of build up some economic progress in the community. And the governor at the time of Rhode Island sent in state troopers, and they violently attacked the smoke shop. There were people thrown to the ground, arms broken. It was an extremely violent act, and the smoke shop never reopened. And every year, both the smoke shop raid and the Great Swamp Massacre are mourned by the tribe, and they have ceremony commemorating those events. And to me, that felt like an echo. That felt like, while it wasn't exactly the same, the intent behind it echoed. And I think part of that is, because there's just so much unhealed in our country.
Vanessa, what I really admire about your writing is you're able to take real events, real situations, and then you create fiction out of that. And you have a real gift for kind of taking some creative license, but also remaining true to some of these real issues. And you do provide an author's note explaining that some of the characters, events, and places are inspired by real people and locations. Do you have a particular creative process for how you combine your fiction with real world events? Because it just seems like that's a tricky slope to navigate.
It is, and also thank you for that very kind thing to say. It's a lot of revision. I get the feeling when I'm reading and researching, like, I want to tell everyone I've ever known this historical fact. I want to tell them about what happened here. I want them to think about it. And I let myself in my early drafts write everything down that feels emotionally important and resonant to me. And then in revision, I get my editor hat on, and I really make sure that every single historical piece is tied to plot. And my number one job is always writing a good thriller. I mean, absolutely, the Indigenous history, all of that is so important to me. But my job is to make sure that the reader has the experience of reading a thriller. And so I really revise and revise and revise again to make sure that the history is being captured, as you said, sort of in a way that's authentic and resonant with what really happened. But it really has to be tied to plot so that the pages keep turning and people don't feel like they've wandered into, a nonfiction book.
All right. Short break, and we'll be right back. Native American candidates are taking office for the first time or returning after the midterm elections, including the first Diné person to be elected to the city council in Gallup, New Mexico, where Native Americans make up more than half of the population. We'll hear more from some of the Native winners of local races on the next Native America Calling.
Every family caregiver could use help finding the necessary resources to care for their loved one. The AARP Family Caregiver Resource Guide helps family caregivers access key programs, services, and agencies in their communities. A copy of the guide is available by calling 877-333-5885 or online at aarp.org/caregiverresources. AARP supports this show.
Native America Calling. We're talking now with author Vanessa Lillie about her new novel, The Bone Thief. If you have questions or comments, you can join us. Just call 1-800-996-2848. We're here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we've got the studio lines open for listeners who would like to join our conversation. If you are a fan of Vanessa Lillie's writing, her books, or you would just like to ask a question to her about her writing process or what goes into coming up with these awesome novels, give us a call, 1-800-99-NATIVE. And Vanessa, I also want to ask you about the time frame for the book. It is set in 2008, and there are even some references to some of the events that were going on around that time, like the presidential campaign with Barack Obama and John McCain. Is there a significance to choosing that specific time frame of what, about 15 years ago?
Yeah, 2008. There was. So in Blood Sisters, there's a tornado right in the middle of the book. And that really was sort of the death knell of the community I was writing about, Pitcher, Oklahoma. And again, it's sort of real history. There was a federal buyout program at that time, but the community was sort of fighting against it. They wanted to sort of stay together because Pitcher is what's called the most toxic town in America. The mining industry had filled the whole community with lead, basically. And so, I wanted to write about that. And then 2008 was when that tornado happened. And so I felt like to really do the story justice, I wanted to actually set it on that weekend when that tragedy struck the town. And from then on, people had to move and leave. And so, and also just from a narrative perspective, to write about a tornado, it's kind of an exciting thing to do creatively, but then also kind of honoring the history of the town. And then the Bone Thief picks up right after. So we continue in 2008.
Okay. And let's talk a little bit more about this historical society, this main adversary that Sid and some of the other characters are pitted up against. Now, like we mentioned, this is a group of very misguided, financially motivated white people. Essentially, they trace their family lineages to the Mayflower, other early colonial settlers. And it's obvious that they are completely fictitious, but it does make a reader question like the influence of non-Native people who might be kind of enthralled with Native American culture for a variety of reasons. And I'm curious to know, like, how harmful do you think these types of individuals or groups might be to contemporary Native interests? And do you think they're gaining traction in any way?
Well, there's certainly a conversation around it. I mean, there's the group, I sort of named them the Founders Society, which is also sort of a play on people who think they founded this country. And this idea that they have the right to just rip anything they want out of the ground and put it on a shelf. And that is not a new concept. And the indigenous communities know that. We have been fighting to have our relations returned to our communities, to have our funerary objects returned, to have objects, or even if you decolonize the term, our belongings returned to our communities. And so I wanted to really explore that. And with the Founders Society, I took some points of view that you see in academic communities, you certainly see in a museum culture that has allowed this to continue for so long. And then I, based some of the rituals on real things you can read about, like the Yale Skull and Bones Society has remains of Geronimo, and the family has sued to get them returned, and they've never been returned. So, while of course it's not a real society, it is based on, I think, real points of view and a very real worldview that others, indigenous remains, and wants people to view them almost like a fossil, like a dinosaur bone versus a real living people.
I think another really fascinating element of the book is that it definitely speaks to the power and the leadership, the influence of Native women, but at the same time, it does offer this very tragic portrayal of the disparities and oppression that Native women often face. And I'm curious to know, how much progress do you feel Native women have made in your lifetime, and what's your hope for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think part of it is around, the language we're speaking around missing and murdered Indigenous women, which listeners at the top of the hour would have heard that news report about how those reports are being, ripped off online. So we don't even have the information we need. So in some respects, we have a language, we know kind of what we need, but yet our government is not responding, which, that's nothing new. So I certainly do have hope. I think that there is a proud tradition of matriarchal leadership. And, I come from the tribe of Wilma Mankeller. There's a lot of incredible women, past and present, who we can look to. And I think, and it's not just Indigenous women. I think we are seeing in this country right now that it is women who are raising their voices against the powers that be, from Congress, to other victims' voices. Like, their women are having to stand forward. And so Indigenous women certainly know how that goes, and we support that, and we're a part of that. And I think it's just our hope that we restore some of the balance that is between the masculine and the feminine, which is, again, another Indigenous view that has been stripped away because of colonialism.
Vanessa, you kicked off your publicity tour right there in Providence, Rhode Island, where you live. Share some highlights of that event and some other appearances you made.
The book tour is so fun. I mean, when you're writing a book, you're just, I'm by myself with my dog, talking to myself. So it's really nice to like put on some decent clothes and go out and talk to people about books. So I've had an amazing tour here in Rhode Island, having conversations with people about, the real history here on our land and in the land in which we live. And then also, I was lucky to get to go back to Oklahoma. I had really great events in Oklahoma. I was in St. Louis, and Houston, and Scottsdale, Arizona. So it's been wonderful connecting with people. And I would, on a hopeful note, say again that the conversations I'm having are people really interested in understanding things that they maybe have missed, as well as I have. I'm learning all the time too. And so I do think that, thank God, there are more Indigenous voices being published, including your incredible other guests coming up. And thanks to that, I think that people are having more access to this information and that I think, more healing is possible.
And the Narragansett people, what's been their response to the book so far?
Yeah, so I just actually had an event last night with Loren Spears, who is the executive director of the Tamaquag Museum, which is the only Indigenous-led museum in Rhode Island. And she and I had a wonderful conversation about Indigenous voices, manuscripts, and museums was sort of the theme. And she's been incredibly supportive. The museum has been so supportive. Because they want, history shared, and they also appreciate that it's a thriller and that's fun for readers. So I've been really lucky to have the continued support of that community.
And the museum, that's actually one of these real locations, real places. That's part of the book.
Yes, and in my author's note, I make a point of it. If anyone is in Rhode Island, definitely go by the Tamaquag Museum because it's incredible. And we often don't go to Indigenous-led museums. I before moving out here, I hadn't been to one. And I think it's really important to understand who is doing the telling of the objects, artifacts, or belongings, if you will, that are on these shelves that we're looking at. And that's just a really important conversation that's happening right now. And museums like Tamaquag, I think, are leading it.
Vanessa the Bone Thief, it came out October 28th, officially went on sale less than a month ago. What are you working on now? What's next? What can we expect to see from you going forward?
Yeah, so I'm working on a speculative thriller, which is a little different for me. I'm having a lot of fun. It's got Da Vinci Code vibes. There's some Indigenous history in it as well. And then I'm also working on another book set back in Oklahoma that I'm calling The Cherokee House that has my family allotment land. And also I get to write about poker, which is one of my favorite subjects. I'm a poker player. So I'm kind of just having a little bit of fun after writing both Blood Sisters and The Bone Thief, which are really meaningful books to me, but very heavy and emotionally draining, I would say. So I'm having a little creative fun right now.
Okay, so this Da Vinci Code idea project, this is getting, because could we expect perhaps like mysteries and puzzles related to like Native American themes and clues, and some sort of a sleuth has to navigate through all these things to figure out some deep-seated secret or history?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
And I'm really interested in like different archetypes echoing. So maybe a Spider Woman versus a Lilith, versus a Hecate, like how these different female archetypes have been echoed in different cultures. And of course, you have to have a good mystery and a puzzle.
Well, Vanessa, this has been fantastic. Really appreciate you coming on the show, and congratulations with The Bone Thief and all of your other projects. And please stay with us here because we might get some callers. And of course, we got Brandon coming up, and I know you know each other well.
I appreciate it so much. Yes, I'm excited to hear all about his incredible new book.
All right. Thank you, Vanessa. 1-800-996-2848. That is the number for any listeners who would like to join our conversation. Just pick up your phone, give us a call. This is our Native Bookshelf. Once a month, we feature inspiring Native authors and their latest works, and we talk about what goes into the creative process. We talk about what motivates them to write. And we just hear about some really, really cool, inspiring stories that we can celebrate here on Native America Calling. So join the conversation, 1-800-99-NATIVE. Let's now bring Brandon Hobson into the conversation. He joins us now from Las Cruces, New Mexico. He has a new novel out as well. It is titled The Devil is a Southpaw. And Brandon, this is a really, really cool book. I've enjoyed reading it. It's a very unique creative storytelling method. It's a very different approach to some of the other books that we talk about on the show, but it's very compelling. And you have this main narrator, a character named Milton Muleborn, and he's envious of this other kid, other person, other character that he meets as a boy. And this character's name is Matthew Echota, and he's Cherokee. And both of these characters, they're artists and they're writers. But the issue is that Milton is not a very reliable narrator. So what can you tell us about your writing process and the way you created this story?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for saying all that. And, I'm glad to be here. It's an honor, of course, always. And so great to hear Lillie, Vanessa Lillie's book and listen to her speak. So I started writing this novel. I wanted to do something really different in terms of, writing it's kind of a trickster book, right? It's a trickster narrative. And so I wanted to early on, I was thinking about, creating this novel using art, my drawings and paintings, and in a story that I knew the story wanted to be suffering and envy, told through the lingering trauma of juvenile incarceration, but also by using the art as a narrative device for Milton Muleborn, who calls himself later on Foolborn. He's a fool and a trickster. And so there was a lot of playful. I was thinking about some of the books that are a little bit more tricky that I've always loved. By Borges and Nabokov and Stephen Millhauser. Murakami, these kinds of writers who influenced me early on, and so that was kind of how it got started. The whole thing. I started, drafting early on, thinking about those things and thinking about, my drawings and drawing and painting from a much younger narrator, and. So it was fun.
Every chapter begins with a sketch, and these are all sketches of yours.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
They're really compelling, and they're all tied directly into the theme of each of these chapters. And you mentioned some of your literary inspirations, some of the other writers that you focus on, and kind of their styles, kind of jibe with what you've written here. And it's fascinating because, like, for the first 100 pages of reading this book, I was like, okay, what's real? Is Brandon writing about his own life, or is he like part of this story? It's like really, but then once you get into it, you kind of realize like that's the whole point. Is it goes back and forth, and there's different characters' perspectives, and it's really cool the way you put it all together. It's but it's definitely, like there's a lot of big words, a lot of vocabulary. You got to really focus. And when you read this book, you've got to dial in and really just completely immerse yourself in the story.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a part of it, is that, Milton trying to write this part one, this novel within the novel. He's trying to write this really sort of difficult book and story of being locked up and escaping from juvenile incarceration, which is what happens, and it's the whole process of the escape, basically, and after they're locked up, and so the language is used. He's using it as an attempt. He's trying to balance humor with sadness, and ultimately trying to manipulate the reader's sympathy, if that makes sense. In a way, he's trying to get the reader to manipulate through the narrative to feel sorry for him in this way. And also, the main theme of this is the struggle his whole life with his mental health, his drug and alcohol problems, and his jealousy of Matthew. And so the book is in 3 parts, and the third part is kind of a re-examining of his childhood, where he's become much more sort of reliable in that retelling, and is exercising humility way more than he did when he wrote the novel. And that's his attempt. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Brandon, a major part of the book occurs with these characters in a juvenile detention facility. Why did you choose to write about incarceration in that way?
Well, I was a social worker for several years in Oklahoma, and I've always wanted to write more specifically about incarceration and that lingering trauma that exists from especially juveniles who are incarcerated. And to do that, I'm always thinking about pushing the novel in some kind of different direction. And as a native storyteller, I think, I tell students this, we talk about this at IAIA in Santa Fe about our stories and each tribe's stories. How can we push that in a way that hasn't been done before? I tell my students here at NMSU the same thing. How can you look at the novel in a new and fresh way and not be afraid to take risks? I think it's very important to take risks when you're a fiction writer. And so, hopefully the goal here was to try to create a novel in a really artful and compelling way.
The book is titled The Devil is a Southpaw. It just went on sale last month. This is the latest novel by Brandon Hobson. Listeners, you might also be familiar with another one of Brandon's novels. It is titled The Removed, and we've also talked about that novel here on Native America Calling. So we're going to take a short break. We'll come back and we'll talk more with Brandon about The Devil is a Southpaw. Stay with us.
Skugtash. For more than 40 years, Ramona Farms has revived ancient traditional foods, tepary beans, pinoli, polentas, and more, all from store.ramonafarms.com. Ramona Farms supports this show. Omye.
Ready to expand your reach and inspire change? Kaufman & Associates crafts culturally grounded communication strategies for Native audiences. More at kaufmaninc.com. KAUFFMANINC.com.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. Author Brandon Hobson is joining us today to talk about his new novel called The Devil is a Southpaw. And if you would like to share a comment or a question for Brandon, you can give us a call right now, 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. And Brandon, we were talking earlier about the book, and, there are quite a few 50-cent words sprinkled here and there in the pages, and there's somewhat of a Proustian-style storytelling approach that, it's definitely intellectually robust, but I also want listeners to understand that there's some really fun parts in this book as well, and you have a lot of references to like old television shows and pop culture, especially like from the mid to late 1980s when I was growing up. So you include a lot of different takeaways for a lot of different types of readers in this book.
Yeah, thanks. Milton, he's a very obsessive guy, and part of him writing this book is working through his obsession. He's working through his obsession with Matthew, whom he's been obsessed with his whole life and jealous of. But also, throughout the book, he references, he sort of slips into these moments of 1980s, 70s and 80s television shows. When he was young, that. You and I, we're around the same age, and so we watched a lot of these shows in the 80s growing up, Alf, and Welcome Back, Kotter, and the movies that he mentions. There's references to Dr. Strangelove and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and so this is just sort of showing his obsession and how he's struggling with this, but. The narrative is supposed to retreat into these moments at times, to where it just sort of shows, this by the way, in that one episode in Alf, this happened. And, so he's using all these sort of different devices. There's also acrostics. There are 2 chapters where he uses an acrostic to spell out a message, and he has letters and, a poem in there. So all that is about, obsession. It's a lot of fun. I love writing about obsessed narrators, obsessed. Like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame last week, I don't know if Jack White, the White Stripes were inducted, and Jack White said, go make your art and get obsessed. I love that he said, go get obsessed, and I think as writers, that's what we do. It's like Vanessa was just talking about, doing all the research, and there's an obsession to fiction writers.
Mm-hmm. And going back to some of your wordsmithing, because you really do have a love of language, and like some of the phrases and some of the words, like at one point you used the phrase steatopagus concupiscence, and then you also mentioned cataleptically Kabbalistic. And Brandon, where do you come up with this stuff?
Yeah, some of those. Well, I mean, it's part of the fun of being a fiction writer is you're playing with words and language, and so some of those words are just taken out of the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary, or just phrases that out of other books too. I know there's some words taken from Cormac McCarthy, that one of his books early on, and just. I have so many books where I've highlighted words that I've looked up that I always thought, this is a fun word. I didn't know that this meant this, right? And so part of Milton is supposed to be his characters. He's using these just gigantic. He's trying really hard, and I think that clearly comes across. He's trying really hard to use this difficult vocabulary. And I mean, my hope is that it's not too much of a distraction for the reader, but certainly the kind of books that I like to read were ones that I had to spend a lot of time with. And certainly books like Paradise Lost or, James Joyce's Ulysses, those kinds of books that you have to spend a lot of time thinking about and, working through. Yeah.
Brandon, do you ever feel that a lot of writing today, especially fiction, is maybe too easy and doesn't challenge readers enough?
Well, I think it's certainly not as challenging as it once was. I know there are articles written about this that a lot of readers simply, they just want to be entertained. They just want a good story, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. Of course, we're all trying to tell good stories, but I guess I'm interested in, I think what, capital L literature is, more interested in cultivating, I guess, a more empathetic and complex experience that makes one more likely to maybe identify with the human condition. And so, that's involves good storytelling, I think, but it also involves, there has to be some work for the reader, no matter what you're reading. I mean, that's what I'm interested in doing. I realize, and a lot of readers are, a lot of my students sort of grew up on Harry Potter, and that stuff's not. I don't know that that's really. Harold Bloom said that wasn't even reading. The literary critic Harold Bloom said, Harry Potter, it's not even reading, and it's full of cliches and so it's not like Lewis Carroll or somebody that was writing children's literature in much more interesting ways, a long time ago. So. I don't know. It's a heavy literary novel, and so I'm always in praise of the difficult book. Proust Is
Yeah.
Nabokov. I mean, I would say even Leslie Silko's The Almanac of the Dead. That's a difficult book. It's a big book, and it's difficult. A lot of Momaday. Dr. Momaday was and Scott Momaday was a big influence on me, and his, especially his poetry, and his fiction. I mean, it requires a lot on the reader to, you just kind of put it away and have to think about it, right? And so, it's not always done through vocabulary, but I think it's done through the language and certainly through the imagery and the structure.
Brandon, we heard from Vanessa earlier about how she researches these historical events that relate to Native people and often historical issues or situations that people might not be familiar with. What insights about Native people do you want your readers to come away with after reading this book?
Yeah, so, Matthew is Cherokee. I don't really explore as much as some of my other work, like The Removed, really gets into Cherokee history. And Where the Dead Sit Talking is, the way that a Native youth is in foster care. And those books sort of have a lot more specifically about the tribe. Here it just happens to be, Matthew and many other of the sort of minor characters in this book, Brandon, Spider, these other minor characters who are locked up with Milton and Matthew are Native, and Rosemary, Sequoia makes a cameo in this book in part 3. He's the protagonist from Where the Dead Sit Talking. And so it doesn't really go necessarily into so much specific tribal, other than thinking about some of the attack against the way that Natives are treated in incarceration, right, in general, while incarcerated. There's some, the drill sergeants make sort of, they kind of make racist remarks, and so there's some of that, but it's minor in this book in terms of the overall point of the novel.
Thanks, Brandon. I want to go back to Vanessa and bring her into the conversation again, because Vanessa, we've been talking about this whole issue of how to challenge readers, right? And creating a good story, but really pushing people to really think about what these stories are about, and even sometimes challenging vocabularies or themes that might be complex and difficult to navigate. What's your thought on that in terms of how do you feel about challenging your readers to really take it to a next intellectual level?
Yeah, that's such a great conversation. I think as writers, we do want to challenge readers in the same way that we probably feel challenged while we're doing our research and learning things that challenge us, challenge our worldview. And so I do think we have a responsibility to share that. But I also agree with Brandon that, it's also okay to just read for the sake of reading. And specifically, it's so important that we're seeing fun Native books, right? That people can pick up a sci-fi, they can pick up a romance, a thriller, that we're in genre too, because we want people to see, a Native sci-fi story. We want to see Native characters falling in love. Like there's a lot of places where we want to be represented. And so if people are having fun reading Native stories too, that's an important part of the conversation.
Brandon, you mentioned earlier one of the characters in the book. His name is Brandon, and I'm curious what you think readers should take away from that. Are you purposefully doing what in theater they call breaking the fourth wall?
Yeah, that's what that is, and it's again, this is a playful. It's a serious novel, but it's also supposed to be playful, right? And so what Vanessa was saying, I 100% agree with. That right now we're seeing more than ever. It's a fantastic time that we're able to see all different kinds of books by Native writers come out in different genres. Certainly horror, and as she said, sci-fi, mystery. You know, her thrillers are just, you know, fantastic and doing really well. So, you know, it's just great. I'm so happy to see that because it's about time. And, you know, so to go back to my name in this, it's not, you know, it kind of fits in with the trickster narrative, right? Who's the real narrator of this story, right? Brandon H., who was locked up with these two guys and, you know, pretended to, you know, be sick all the time, and he was staggering around and trying to get out of detention. You know, he's ultimately saying, this is the manuscript that I received from Milton. And, you know, but who is Milton? Who is Brandon? Those kinds of questions are, I think, ultimately what I wanted readers to come away with. And by the end, my hope is that ultimately the whole thing is about forgiveness, right? Like the way that we treat each other, the way others have treated us. You know, we live in a time where it seems that people aren't very forgiving. And so, you know, Brandon H. in the beginning says, you know, peace be with him. You know, it should be about forgiveness, despite this narrative.
Brandon, The Devil is a Southpaw. It has a national print and online campaign, reviews, features, book signings, events. Give us some highlights.
Well, highlights for you mean where I'll be, or
yeah. What do you have coming up, and what are some of the interviews you've done? Yeah.
Okay. So I'll be at the Miami Book Festival this weekend. About to head out to Miami, and in the spring I'll be at the Santa Fe Literary Festival. I'll also be at the Tucson Book Festival. I'll be with Vanessa at AWP in Baltimore. For those who are going to AWP, we'll be on a panel together. And so, hopefully I want to do something back in Oklahoma too, soon, which is, you know, where my family is. So
AWP, help us out. What does that stand for?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's the Association of Writing Programs. It's a yearly and annual conference in a different city. A lot of university writing, creative writing programs, and it's a book fair, gigantic book fair there as well. It's in Baltimore this spring in March, and Vanessa and I will be on a panel talking about our books and about with Kelly Jo Ford, another Cherokee writer, and a couple of others, I think.
This all sounds really, really exciting. Brandon, we were talking before the show. You've been in Las Cruces now, I believe, about 8 years. And has living in New Mexico, has it changed your writing style or had an influence on how you write at all?
Not really. Living here has changed it. I don't think. I love New Mexico, and I think, I mean, if there's anything, the land is quite different, you know, out here than it is in Oklahoma, and it's down here. You know, I'm very close to the border, and so it's very deserty where I am in Las Cruces, as you know, and so, I mean, I think I spend a lot of time outside, and I think about the land a lot, and I love writing about the land and about, you know, atmosphere. So I don't know. Maybe it has changed it. I don't know.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave that question open-ended for another conversation because we're out of time. But I really want to thank our two guests who joined us today, both Vanessa Lillie and Brandon Hobson, for sharing these wonderful books that have just been published. And please, listeners, join us again next week as we start out hearing from Native elected officials who are either taking office for the first time or returning to their seats at local elections around the country. Our executive producer is Art Hughes. Our producers are Andy Murphy, Sol Traverso, and Joe Thompson. Marino Spencer is the engineer. Sho McPolin is the digital producer. Nola Daves Moses is the distribution director. Bob Peterson is the network manager for Native Voice One. Clifton Chadwick is our national underwriting sales director. Antonia Gonzalez is the anchor for National Native News. Charles Sather is our chief operations officer. The president and CEO of Quantic Broadcast Corporation is Jacqueline Salee. Have a safe weekend. I'm Sean Spruce.
Hey, isto man ko ahos wea ke tenam awa na kap to bani sikanawa. Yam to da ko mos awa shu ap to ki kwat ko is breast cancer screening te to to mati dapanna. Asla tayu yan kanihan to this healthcare.gov/coverage kinawa nan ta isto 1-800-318-2596 sa pedanaket up to. Look your Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services to na pedadito lo kanawe. Ela kwa.
The Association on American Indian Affairs invites all to Tribal Museums Day, December 6th through December 12th. Tribal museums may offer no-cost or reduced admission, art markets, and live cultural demonstrations. Tribal Museums Day honors diverse Native nations as the experts of their own cultures. You can find a map of tribal museums and more at indian-affairs.org/Tribal Museums Day. The association supports this show.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Quantic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.